Welcome back to another episode of Mind, Body, Spirit. I'm Dr. Kate, and today's guest is the author of the book Genius Foods. He's a very inspiring and handsome man. His name is Max Lugavere. Please welcome him to the show. Hi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm so happy you're here, and thank you for coming.
It's so great to be here. Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that we connected, and I'm blushing from your introduction still. So.
Well, I'm sorry. Well, we were talking off camera about how everyone here thinks that you could have been a model if you weren't a food genius. So.
You know, coulda, woulda, shoulda. It certainly probably would have been easier than trying to crunch through all the available research there is and write about an organ as complicated as the brain. But no, I'm really grateful that I get to do what I do, and that my book has reached people, that I've built a community online, that I get to do this for a living. Like it's just amazing. But it's all rooted in just trying to help people.
Yeah, and it seems like you've really tapped into a passion for health, which is what you were saying is your current focus, and that you've in the past had other passions. Did you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am a passionate person, and there have been different iterations throughout my life of things that I get obsessed with. Like for a very long time, and I still am obsessed with music. You know,
okay.
It's and the same way that I approached health, as an autodidact, meaning I taught myself. That's how I approach music. And when I was in my mid-20s, I started to play guitar, and I taught myself how to play, and I taught myself how to sing, and I taught myself how to write songs. And it was something that it was a very powerful, symbolic journey for me to be able to do that, because for a long time I thought that I had no musical talent or ability, or that it was something that you had to be born, knowing how to do.
And did you think that because you were not good when you initially tried? Is that where that?
Yeah, I wasn't good, and because I didn't know how to do it.
Right.
It showed me that, if you want to do something, all you have to do really is practice and dedicate yourself to it, and anything's possible. You can't do everything, but you can do anything. You just have to pick that one or two things that you want to do and focus on it.
Right. Yeah, I love that message. And if other people can do it, like, why couldn't you? I think that's an important message as well.
Yeah, I kind of realized that there's enough people that around the world that can sing and that can play music, that there's got to be something teachable to it, something that you can learn. And once I intellectually was able to wrap my head around that, then it just became about the work, practicing. And that's actually exactly how I approached health and trying to understand, how best to feed the human body. It was motivated by something that was very tragic to me. My mom got sick and developed dementia at a very young age. And at first I felt like, understanding nutrition and science and the brain was like this thing that was, behind closed doors to me, because I wasn't an academic, right? I didn't go to medical school. I was not an academic scientist.
But you wanted to go to med, or you were thinking about pre-med, right?
I did, yeah. In college, I was pre-med for 2 years, okay. And I got A's in chemistry and biology, but ultimately I realized that I loved storytelling, and I loved communication, and I loved art, and that I was a creative person.
Creative expression, yeah.
Yeah, and I just didn't think that I honestly, when I was in college, I had enough self-awareness at the time to realize that I wasn't going to be happy going through that gauntlet that is medical school and,
right.
and all that. But that being said, I still had this passion, and
I also think our generation was kind of taught that you had to choose, like you're either right-brained or left-brained, and we're realizing now that is not the case, and these things are all blending together, which is kind of what you did with this book.
100%, you're so right. And in fact, almost every neuroscientist that I know, every medical doctor that I know, and I know many of each at this point, they all are also musicians. It's very funny. They're all also really into art.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there's this division that we
right.
once thought between art and science. I think
right.
it's all kind of one.
Right. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. So your mother was sick, and it started to look like it was going to be a dementia diagnosis. And I don't know what type of dementia she had, but I guess that's moot.
She had a kind of Parkinsonian complex.
Like a Lewy body? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you started what? Like researching foods that, like, how did you know to get to food? Like, how was that?
Well, I'd always been interested in health and nutrition. And so I kind of always had a bias towards preventative health, I guess you could say,
right.
Nutrition and just how potent of an effect what we eat plays in terms of our health, right? And at the time, I kind of saw that, I knew from my work as a journalist, I had worked for a TV network called Current TV,
Okay.
Which Al Gore had founded for many years. I knew that public health was in kind of a sorry state. I knew that many people around the world were increasingly becoming overweight, developing obesity, that type 2 diabetes and even pre-diabetes were reaching epidemic proportions. And so I knew that there was some kind of environmental factor in terms of our health as a whole, as a society. And it made me wonder whether or not those same factors that were predisposing so many of us to these kinds of lifestyle conditions could be having an effect on our brains, and what that might imply for what it was that my mom developed.
Right.
Because my mom was young. I had no prior family history of any kind of dementia. And my mom's mom, my grandmother, on my maternal side, she was 96 at the time, or 94, 90, or she was, I guess when my mom first started showing those initial symptoms, she was in her early 90s.
Okay.
Nonetheless, she was in her 90s,
Right.
and she was cognitively sharp.
Right.
So I knew that there was something that changed in between my grandmother's generation and my mom's generation that led to some kind of epigenetic switch, maybe, in my mom, causing her to succumb to this condition.
And that probably made you scared for yourself and your siblings if you have. Right?
Yeah, well, it did make me scared for myself, but it basically suggested to me that there was something that needed to be explored. There were questions that needed to be asked about the diet that my mom had consumed throughout her life, the lifestyle that my mom had around her life, and that really began the basis of my investigation. So.
Okay, and then how did you, so let's talk about the book now and like what the idea is behind these foods and how they work.
Yeah, so I mean, the book is really not meant to be another doom and gloom book like, avoid this, avoid that.
Right.
Although there's plenty of that in the book, I really wanted to add something positive to the conversation, and really what I did was I highlighted the foods that I saw in the literature coming up again and again and again as being protective to the brain.
Okay.
And I coined them the genius foods.
Okay.
And the genius foods is not a scientific term, kind of like superfoods,
Right, of course.
But these are the foods that I think really give your brain the tools that it needs to not only help it defend itself against modern toxicity and oxidative stress and things like that, but also that are going to give your brain the raw materials that it requires to create healthy new brain cells, which we now know the adult brain can do up until death.
Right, which is an amazing thing that we figured out recently. And
Exactly.
also learning about the neuronal branching, being able to branch from healthy to dead to healthy neurons, right?
Yeah.
So one thing I've spoken with other people about in the past is when we talk about superfoods, since you brought it up, did you discover in your research for this book that a lot of the foods that we maybe don't consider super actually are, like, for example, oranges or something, when you look at the nutrient contents?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like, the term is not, it's a term that I use loosely, and no single food is going to have any major impact on your health. At the end of the day, your health is going to be determined by your dietary pattern.
Okay.
How you consistently show up to your meals every single day,
Okay.
And so if you're eating all the genius foods, in accordance with the recommendations that I make in the book, 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time you're falling off, well, you're probably going to end up seeing positive things happen to your health, right? Because again, no single food, it's not just about eating a blueberry here and there that's going to boost your brain health. It's about incorporating these foods into your diet as a whole. So yeah, it's oranges, I think, are great. I don't highlight oranges in my book, but citrus, I'm a big fan of citrus.
I just think it's interesting because we get really excited about these exotic things like a goji berry or something, and then when you compare the foods that we grew up with.
Oh yeah, I mean, right. I think grass-fed beef is a superfood.
Right.
Like way more so than a goji berry.
Right. So
nothing against goji berry. I like goji
no,
berries.
Of course. And like, have you encountered anything where, as far as taking in these foods yourself versus all these really fancy ways of supplementing them, where the nutrients are pre-made that way? Do you think that there's a preference, or do you
like whole foods versus supplements?
Yeah, I mean, right.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I think our food has become less nutritious over time, and certainly over the past 50 years. There's a researcher at University of Texas named Donald Davis who's found that just over a 50-year span, Some of our produce, some of our nutrients have declined by 38%
Okay.
in our produce. So, we can credit that to the fact that we're pillaging our soils.
Yeah.
There's more CO2 than ever in the atmosphere. Our growing practices prioritize yield over nutrition.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which makes sense from a profit standpoint,
Right.
but not so much from a health standpoint.
Yeah.
So there's all these factors that are leading to what inevitably you can see in the research, that many of us are nutrient deficient, and that's where I think supplements do have value today. I'm not anti-supplements,
Right.
but in terms of the recommendations that I would make to people, there's no one size fits all recommendation. So you might need fish oil, whereas another person doesn't. You might need a supplement today that 10 years from now you don't need. So everybody's different, and everybody changes, from time to time. So it's not a one size fits all paradigm. But as a blanket, am I pro or against supplements? I'm pro supplements. I take them.
Okay, great. So a good healthy mix of these foods, plus
Yes.
possibly adding in some more concentrated nutrients
Right.
would be helpful.
If you're eating all the healthiest, versions of these foods, grass-fed beef and not grain-fed beef, wild salmon, not farmed salmon, and you're eating organic produce, then my hope is that you will require few, if any, supplements.
Right. But in chronic disease, it's like you're already kind of, right?
We've just become depleted,
Okay, so I'd like to get into some other aspects now. We were talking off camera again about your spiritual practice, and I know that you mentioned when you started eating this diet yourself that you immediately were seeing changes in your day-to-day brain function. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I definitely felt that. I mean, I don't know how much stock I would put in that as because it's an anecdote, but still.
No, but we're talking about your journey, and
yes.
I think that this is not just about these foods. I mean, this is about a higher purpose. Like you
Right.
are contributing to society with this book.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, that's my hope.
Okay. So I'm wondering, because as far as how foods make us feel, and we know a lot about in ancient traditions that people sometimes for meditation, they're not eating, or if they're eating certain foods that contributes to their spiritual practice, right?
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you noticed any energetic changes or changes in your spiritual practice when you started eating these foods.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky territory to start talking about how food can affect your spirituality, but I will say that one aspect of our executive function is empathy and altruism, and an ability to delay gratification, which
Okay.
you might say are quasi-spiritual characteristics, right?
Absolutely.
And those are reliant on healthy executive function, and our executive function is influenced by our diets and our lifestyles.
Right.
So I would say that in so far as our, by eating the right foods, the genius foods, can help our brains to essentially reach a point of self-actualization, I do think that eating the right foods can help support spirituality, for sure.
And I totally see where you're going with that. Do you want to explain what executive function is, just for people who...
Yeah, so executive function is sort of like the voice of reason in your conscious thought. It's thought to be kind of rooted in the prefrontal cortex, which is the area just behind your forehead. And it's a lot of the aspects that make us human are sort of linked to executive abilities, decision making, planning, getting stuff done is an attribute or an ability of our executive function, and so executive function, it's thought to relies on neurotransmitters and
dopamine, right? And
dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, yeah.
So we're talking about how food impacts, and I've talked about this with tryptophan because I think that's a very important when you're not getting dietary tryptophan, which I'm seeing in a lot of vegans. They're not getting a lot of tryptophan, and then sometimes you can shunt the little bit you have into kynurin, which is inflammatory, versus serotonin, right?
Yeah.
But dopamine is huge, and dopamine is food. Do you want to talk about where dopamine comes from and what foods so people know?
Yeah, I mean, the precursor to dopamine is tyrosine, right?
Right.
And tyrosine is an essential amino acid. It's found in your food, and I think if you're eating a diet with adequate protein, I actually make the recommendation for a high protein diet.
Okay.
Because I think that protein, it's very good in terms of helping procure bodily health. It's very satiating. It can help us maintain lean mass. It can help us lose weight.
And what type of protein are you talking about when you say high protein?
I mean, I love grass-fed beef, chicken, fish, eggs. These are all packed with essential amino acids. Yeah, I don't look to vegetables for protein the same way that I don't look to meat for fiber. Like I think we need to separate church and state and like incorporate a varied diet that incorporates both. So I'm very proudly omnivorous.
Okay. So to go back to spirituality, because we went right back to food
Yeah.
with that. How do you see this book and like this work as part of your purpose and like your life journey?
I just think it's, I mean, I love it. I'm genuinely enamored with science and human potential and nutrition and food and just I love everything that I love the entirety of nutrition and preventative health, and exercise and sleep. Like to me, it's all so interesting and that I get to talk about it and that, and that I saw really kind of the consequences, the potential consequences of what happens when all those things are not in alignment. It's really motivated me to do this, and I get clues along the way, like breadcrumbs, on the trail that suggest to me that I'm on the right path. The fact
Want
that
to share some of those?
well, I mean, the fact that Genius Foods has
Well.
resonated with
Yeah.
people and with so many people, and I'm so proud of the text. Like everything that's in it, like I stand by, and it's such an amazing thing to have achieved, and the fact that I've gotten to become, an expert on shows like the Dr. Oz show, the Rachel Ray show, the Doctors.
You have a platform that it's amazing.
Yeah, and I don't think that they don't give those kinds of platforms to just anybody. So, those are the signs, like, to me, that let me know in a very humble way
Right.
that, like, I'm doing what it is that I should be doing,
Right, absolutely.
So, yeah, I'm grateful and humbled and that's it.
Yes, all right. And it's also interesting. I think we're about the same age, but it's our generation is having to really step up for our parents' generation because they got a lot of short ends of sticks. I feel like,
Yeah.
right? And then we have too in some ways, but it is hard trying to reprogram all of these eating patterns that to them it doesn't make any sense. Like they don't want to change and they don't understand why they shouldn't have bread or
Totally. I mean, the thing is about our parents' generation, there was this lack of information. There was like a vacuum because of the lack of internet, right?
Right.
So it really allowed this specialist mindset to flourish where if you were not a doctor or a nutritionist, what right did you have to know about nutrition?
Right. And why would you care to?
Why would you care to? Yeah. I mean, you just ate according to the USDA,
Right.
the government guidelines, right?
Right.
Or what magazines would tell you to eat,
Right.
And now it's, so there was like that vacuum of information into which ignorance was allowed to fester and allow for things like the food pyramid to really become the predominant dietary guideline
Right, which was like a joke.
for human beings. Yeah,
Right.
and before that there were no dietary guidelines, right, for the vast majority of human history, and in that circumstance is how we arrived and we became the robust, amazing species that we are, right? But then now the pendulum has swung into another direction where information is free, it's out there, research is out there, but also there are influencers and there are numerous blogs and publications and documentaries on Netflix that all claim to have seen the light, so to speak, and not all of that is accurate either.
Right.
So now there's like this
propaganda element.
Right. There's totally a propaganda element. So it's like, how do you know at the end of the day what is the right way for you to eat?
Yes, how do you know? Tell
Yeah,
us.
how do you know? Well, I don't know.
Tell us, Max.
I think you have to do your own research and look to people that you trust, and not just accept. Even if you trust that person, even if
Right.
you trust me, don't accept everything at face value. Develop a critical lens,
Yeah.
and take the recommendations that you read and inquire further.
Right.
Try to develop your own sort of paradigm and I don't know.
Like intuition, right?
Intuition.
And like
yes.
informed decisions,
Yes.
but ultimately it's up to you, right?
Yes.
Everyone is their own
Exactly.
best friend in this, right?
Exactly. And what I can tell you is that it's a lot more difficult for me to say who you should follow, and where you should get your information from. That's more difficult. What is easier is to say the kinds of people that you should avoid, and the kinds of blogs that you should avoid.
Which are?
And I think that, anybody who speaks condescendingly, overly aggressively, or overly confidently about topics as complicated as science and nutrition,
absolutely,
that makes really outlandish claims, that suggests that this one diet or this one supplement or this one pill is going to be the magic pill that's going to help cure a myriad of ailments,
right.
I think that you've got to run far from those blogs and those sources. At the end of the day, everybody's different. And when we speak with certainty, I mean, that has to be couched in the notion that we're talking in terms of probabilities.
Right.
Like, everybody has different genes, fitness levels, genders, ages.
Yes.
We don't know how these recommendations are going to affect you. Like, for example, I love coffee, and we can zoom out and look at observational data. And
that's really back and forth on that.
Yeah,
topic,
well,
right?
but everybody has a different relationship with coffee, right?
Right.
And so at the end of the day, you've got to kind of see yourself as an N of one experiment and be willing to kind of tinker.
Right. And be okay with the fact that it may not be okay. It might not be the best thing for you, but you're living with those decisions.
Yeah. I mean, I think
coffee the world, right?
Yeah. I think coffee is good for me.
It's home for me. I was arguing with my friend this morning about my coffee intake.
Yeah. I think coffee's healthy. I mean, it's healthy, but it can be abused. It's a drug.
It can be toxic too. I mean, there's concerns, but we could go into on another episode.
Yeah.
Well, Max, thank you so much for this interview today. For anyone who hasn't read your book, where can they find it?
Everywhere books are sold. Amazon,
Okay.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Yeah, it's out there.
Okay, and we'll get your handles up there so they can check out your Eat This, Not That, which is
Oh,
we
man.
didn't even talk about that, but that's really fun. They
You're
can
awesome.
see that online. Well, thank you, Max, so much for coming. This has been such a wonderful episode, and thank you all for watching. You can binge watch the rest of these episodes at drkaytetv.com and also on the EverTalk app on Apple TV and Roku. I'm Dr. Kayte. This has been another episode of Mind, Body, Spirit. This is Max. Have a wonderful day.